if Kelly can, Kelly's recording. Thank you, Kelly. Let's pray ourselves in. Holy One, thank you for the beauty of this day. Beautiful outside here in the Bay Area. Beautiful from what I can see behind our sister Ruby Sales, who has who forewent her trip back to New York so she could be here with us today, well rested. Continue to bless us and bless this conversation and bless this moment of human living that you have set us to, that we might become more and more human and loving and call forth a new and highest consciousness, a Christ consciousness in our world today that so needs your agape love. Bless our conversation and may it awaken and stir something in us that will give us and others new life. Amen. And now I turn it to Lee. Oh, and I did want to say, if you want to see most, you can, if you're gallery view right now, you can go up to the top right corner, click view and hit speaker, and you'll see whoever's speaking at the time. Or if, like me, you're mostly here to see Ruby, you can go to Ruby's little square, click the three dots in the top right corner and click pin, and then you'll see and hear Ruby this whole time. So Lee.
Well, I am so thrilled to be here with all of you, and Ruby, it is just amazing to have you here with us. It's such a great privilege and thrill that you're with us. I met Ruby first when I was working on a project called Being Peace and the Power of the Voice, researching women who've used their voices to create nonviolent change in the world. And I found Ruby through listening to interviews of civil rights archives of Vincent and Rosemary Harding. And I heard Ruby interviewed in that and immediately, wanted to reach her and meet her and interview her myself. So I called her, and really quickly, Ruby called me back personally. And I was just so thrilled to actually have her call, which was such a great, wonderful feeling to have that connection. And so I was able to go to Washington, where she lived at the time, to interview her. And Ruby is a deeply committed social activist and scholar, public theologian, and educator, and in civil, gender, and human rights. And she is the founder of the Spirit House Project and has done groundbreaking work on community and nonviolence formation, and especially to building bridges between generations. Ruby reminds us, she calls for transformative justice in all aspects of life: personal, social, spiritual, political, and economic. She reminds us by saying that movements represent the souls of people and not just transactional or legal rights. She said that movements predicate themselves on radical rearrangements of our relationships with each other. And some of the questions that have really struck me, especially that Ruby talks about, is how do we recover intimacy in a technocracy and a culture that has been based on white supremacy thinking and actions. And she's called on younger generations to collaborate with her, which we'll hear about, and also calling for them to learn from their elders, from their hindsight, insight, and foresight. Ruby has talked about Martin Luther King Jr. as being a prophet, and in the sense that he had a vision, he held a vision for us becoming our best selves. And I really, Ruby, see you doing that. You're calling on all of us to find that vision in ourselves, and you are doing that right now. And Ruby has a blog from my front porch where she is speaking very, very strong truth every day. So if you want to tune in to that, to feel connected to what Ruby is talking about on a daily basis, I encourage you to do that. And in that blog, Ruby, one of the things too that has struck me so much is you've been calling on all of us, but you've also been calling on white people to speak up and to step up actions. So now's our chance to really do that. All of us, not just white people, but you've been calling us out in a sense to take action. So thank you, Ruby, for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yay. Go ahead.
It is really quite a moving experience to hear someone whom you think so highly of, to regard the work that you're trying to do. Beryl Lee, I'm just really so grateful that we're in the same congregation. And I so appreciate the support that you lend not only to me, but also to Spirit House and the work that you're doing to make sure that we reach our highest selves as human beings. Molly, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation today. And I'm so pleased and so honored to have a conversation with you as we did yesterday. Thank you so much. Carmen, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with all these old folks this morning. We thank you for that.
She's never going to forget this, Ruby.
I will not.
Can we just some jazz hands? Because we would be applauding if we were in person. We're just so thrilled you're here. Ruby, there was so much chatter at the after party after church. You just have awakened something in all of us and really have touched so many of us already. And people were just couldn't wait to get here to be with you in the room in person, to be sitting on your front porch with you and learning from you. When I re-listened to your interview with Krista Tippett this week, I remembered that one of the central questions that you ask as a way into conversation is, where does it hurt? And I want to ask you, is that still the question? Is, considering all we've been through in the last 4 years, the last 4 months, the last 3 weeks, is that still the question?
That is still the question. And it is a question that comes from wounds that are as old as this country. It is a question that we must ask ourselves, not only as a collectivity, not only as a community, but also as individuals. It means that it requires us to really interrogate our assumptions about ourselves, about each other, and also about God. It requires us to really look at the ways in which we are all harmed and dehumanized by a system that commodifies, vilifies, held captive human beings. I was thinking this morning, how is it that a people internalize self-hatred so much that they would be willing to commit suicide, kill themselves by not wearing masks, or someone who despises them?
Yes.
I would ask that person, instead of getting angry, I would want to know, where does it hurt?
Yeah.
What makes you so think so little of yourself that first of all, you'd be willing to kill yourself and to kill others, but to do it for someone who holds you in utter contempt? And so that's a question that's not only for the person who refuses to wear a mask, it is also a social spiritual question for all of us. What hurts so much in each of us that we're willing to be loyal, to bow down and worship a system that holds each of us in contempt?
What is?
And what would you say, Ruby, if you say you're talking to an unmasked person who's in your face. So not only is their life at risk, but your life is at risk too. And you say, where does it hurt? And you raise this question of, how can you hold your life in such poor regard? And they say, oh, Kung flu, China virus, it's all a hoax. It's a democratic hoax. Like they're so down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories that you can't reach them even with such a beautifully destabilizing heart question like that.
I think that one has to look at oneself, and it holds back the contempt, because despite all of what I know as an African American, despite all of what I've endured as an African American, despite all of the victories that my people have achieved, there are ways in which I'm still complicit with the system. And so that's the place that you begin, with a tender heart, a self-critique. And it doesn't mean that you don't hold people accountable, but if you see yourself in others and you're not operating from self-righteousness, but a desire for justice, then one has to begin with one's own self. And if you can see your own failures, that means that you're able to recognize other people's failures without giving in to demonization, without creating a stratification of us and them. And it is from that standpoint that we engage in a conversation, from compassion, from relatedness rather than otherness.
Wow, thank you. That's beautiful. Lee intimated in her introduction about how much you talk about every generation, elders, youngers, we all need to be part of this movement. Are there specific tasks for each generation? I think about you as a young person. I think about you when you were a young person, and your courage and the courage of other young people in the movement. What do you have to say to young people today? How do they find that courage? So this is kind of a three-part question. Middle-aged people like me, I'm 50, I'm still raising my kids, I'm working full-time. I actually really love to take to the streets. I feel like I missed my moment, growing up in the 80s, and this is it now. But balancing that with, the demands of work and family and professional life. And then for older folks who may feel like maybe their bodies are starting to fail them, they don't have the energy they once did, or they have a lot to protect. They have, wealth and privilege to protect. They may not frame it that way, but there's a reluctance. What are the tasks in each generation to be part of this moment and movement?
First of all, my courage was not my courage out in abstraction. It was deeply rooted in watching the older Black people around me and the courage that they manifested in the deep travail of segregation and physical violation. And so it was, and that they had the faith to set forth a project to educate the youth for the advancement of the race and for the preservation of our rights and liberties. And they dedicated themselves to that project, even when there was no evidence that their work would bear fruit. They kept on healing. So I looked around, and it was from their courage that I got my courage. And I would say to young people, look around you, look around you, look at the older people around you who've stayed on the journey for 50 and 60 years. That's where you find your courage, not in seeing the differences in generations. There should be generational differences. If there are not differences, then that means that society is static and we've not made progress. The whole purpose of a movement is to move each generation higher and higher than the previous generation. And so that it is not conflict, it's a natural progression. And we need to stop always seeing each other, seeing things through the lens of Western fragmentation. And so, yes, you're going to see things because you've been raised in a technocracy in a way that I have not participated or been victimized by that technocracy. You need to show me and tell me, and you need to argue with me because my eyesight gets dimmed by age, and as I get further and further away from the contemporary issues. So you need to challenge me, but you don't need to kill me, and I don't need to kill you. And for older people, I would say, It is in hindsight, insight, and foresight that we find our hope, and that we begin to look at life through the long, not just in terms of short-term vision, but in the long-term vision. And we go all the way back, if you're white, you go all the way back to the abolitionist movement. If you're Black, you go all the way back to the Northern Freedom Movement that was a part of the abolitionist movement. And you find hope in history. And you know also that no law lives forever, that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, and truth trust to the ground shall rise again. And you remember that once there was an empire called Great Britain, where they bragged that the sun did not rise and set on their holdings, and they are pale image of themselves. Empires fall, but the people's impulse for freedom never dies. And that's where you find your hope.
Yes, yes, yes. So I think you've already answered it, but my next question was going to be, you call yourself a pragmatic optimist. I vibe with you. Are we better off than we were in 1965? Or is it different? Adrienne Marie Brown said, it's not worse, it's just more is being revealed. Hold tight to each other as more is revealed.
I think technocracy provides us a larger optic to which to view the world. And I'm not sure if you were a Black person living in Jackson, Mississippi, or Columbus, Georgia during segregation, that you would want to split hairs about what's better and what's worse. I think that the situation, as you've said, is very different. And just as protests and movements evolve, so does oppression, so does systemic oppression evolve. So we're looking at an evolution of the same systemic white supremacist, Christo-fascist, um, capitalist technocracy today. And it's really important that the other thing that I wanted to say to everybody, I assume that we're gathered here this morning because we understand that life is more than just matter and what we see. We also know that it's also that which we cannot see, which is our human consciousness. That consciousness makes up the total human being. And so the question is, if we believe that life is more than material, more than matter, more than what we have, more than what we own, more than our titles, more than all of that, if we really believe that, then is it a privilege to be the beneficiaries of a system that dehumanizes you and robs you of your capacity to live freely on the earth with other people? And is that a privilege? Or is that a dehumanization? Is that soul murder? And so you can't critique a system when you think that the system your benefactor. How do you do that? That's a contradiction. If you think that what you have is privilege and not see the connection between what you have and how you achieve what you have. And that there's no privilege for us to live in a society fueled by hatred. There's no privilege to be a beneficiary of a culture of whiteness that reduces all of us, that requires all of us to destroy all of our multiple identities, our gender, our sexual, our class, our age, our geographic, all of our multiple identities, our ethnic, and reduce us to something called skin, the emptiness and the hollowness of skin. That is not a privilege, that is soul murder. So our task in the 21st century is to put back together all of our identities so that we speak in tongues, so that movement people must speak in multiple tongues about the human condition, where each of our identities form a whole. It is not a privilege to be the victim of soul murder. And that's what we have to resolve. If you, and now I would expect a sociologist to think that that might be the case, but for people who see themselves as having spiritual beliefs, who believe in an inner life, who believe in the breath of life, then why would we say that it is a privilege to be segregated in small areas and no one is allowed to go outside of their communities, to
Yes.
live with white fear, to live with white rage? Why is
Yes.
that a privilege?
Right.
Why is it a privilege for Black people to become the very people whom we work to try to help transform themselves? These are hard questions.
Yeah. They're really important questions, and they beg one more question, which is how. Reverend Kelly, who's one of our pastors and a truly loving person, says in the chat, how do we refuse this toxic inheritance? How do we set it aside? Because you're right, it's not a privilege, but we've been schooled to that, we've been brainwashed to that, and it certainly is very anesthetizing, privilege and comfort and power and wealth.
Well, first of all, it's not going to happen overnight. It's a journey, it's a progression. And I'm not sure we ever complete the work, but the most important thing is not to try to complete that which we cannot complete, but to be a part of the evolution of the work. And the first thing to do is to deal with our language and to really begin to interrogate ourselves as much as we're interrogating the outside world. It is really important that we understand that the work that we do for justice is not just the work that we do to change other people, but it's also to change ourselves. And we see that with Jesus as he went on the road, although he had been in the wilderness, emptying himself of all of the impediments, the empire impediments, external, the consciousness, elevating his consciousness to be in community formation in preparation for the work that he will have to do. Even though he did that, he still met things on the road that transformed his life. He was not just transforming lives, his life was being transformed when he met the woman with the flow of blood and the way in which he responded to her in such a misogynistic, patriarchal way, and how he had to check himself. The Syrophoenician woman, Jesus was constantly in progress. And so, as old Black folks say, you don't, it's not pragmatic think that you're going to complete the journey. But and that's sort of egocentric also. We're never going to complete the journey, but the purpose is to at least get started and to move the ball just a little bit further.
Thank you. Ruby, earlier today, we were talking about the authority of Jesus and why people responded to him. And a number of folks at Coffee Hour saw in you the same spirit that they see in Jesus, the words, the deeds, but also a presence, a loving, joyful, attractive presence that lifts us all up. One of Constance, one of our sisters here at church, asked us, how have you protected your emotional life? What has been your emotional, she says, discuss your emotional survival over the years. And I'd add to that, if it's not too personal, have you ever had a dark night of the soul? Have you ever had a moment when this deep well of your belonging to God as a child of God has failed you?
I don't think it has failed me, but certainly I'm human and I certainly have had dark moments of the soul. I had a dark moment when Jonathan was murdered and I couldn't speak for 6 months. I went into a shell and I had a dark moment. I had a dark moment when I went to divinity school and found myself being disingenuous to get the collar. And I had to pull myself back and say, wait. And I had to realize that I'm no different from anyone else, that the price has never been high enough that I wanted to sell out. And suddenly I found myself being willing to do some things for and I had, so I've had dark moments. We all have dark moments. And it's a childhood fantasy to think that that we go through life in a perfect state of happiness or a perfect state of peace and calm. Jesus was if we can recall, Jesus in the storm, where constantly the disciples' lives were being turned upside down and set right again. And so that we don't expect this journey to be without storms. The question is, what is the state of your boat? And what about your oars? Are you prepared to navigate the storm? And so, yes, the answer to the question is yes. And my emotional life is not separated from my spiritual life. My emotional life is taken care of in my work for justice because it makes me believe that I am not a victim of history, that I do have the power, that God, in God's infinite grace, God has given each of us the power to remove ourselves from bad history and to create another story. So this thing of separating out our emotional lives from our prayer life, from the songs that we listen to, all of those things are modalities. When I grew up in the Baptist church in the South, it took me a while to realize why Black women went to church on Sunday and why they shouted. That was a collective ritual, a preparation of lamentation and celebration, not only lamenting what they had gone through that week, but also celebrating that they were alive to go another week and change things. And so that this whole Western notion of instant gratification and the separation of our ritualized practices from our emotional life and our spiritual life. Our spiritual life is our emotional life in many ways. And so I would ask each of us to understand and to take seriously the modalities of healing that you're engaged in. Prayer is not simply a ritual that you do because it's a ritual. It's a cleansing, it's a reaffirmation, it's lamentation, and a celebration. And it really prepares us to go out in the world to be in community without becoming broken winged birds.
Without becoming broken winged birds. What a beautiful image. Our sister Brittany here at church, I'm just going to read her comment, says, I'm not sure how to name the question rolling around in my head, but how would you strike the balance between finding our curiosity about how people come to believe hateful beliefs and be in respectful dialogue with someone across differences, and also not creating what some people call a safe place for hate? This is something Brittany's worked on a lot, talking to white women in the South. I hope you don't mind me calling you out, Brittany, calling you in on that. Brittany adds, I don't know that I call it safe space. In my mind, it's, as you say, finding our common hurt. I can certainly relate to hurt and joy, but what do you say to people who are afraid to engage in that way?
We're not there to make people, we're there to give information, to engage in conversation, but we're not God. We can't make people. We can only give what we can offer and to give it with the best intentions that's in our hearts. And the thing that I would say is that once having done that, then you let it go because it becomes their journey. Notice that Jesus didn't stick around. Once Jesus participated in the ritual of healing, he moved on to the next station. And so I'm saying that we're not God. We cannot fix people. What we can do is that we can engage in a community ritual that's not only healing for the person, but also for us. And Brittany, the thing that I would say to you as an African American is that one of the ways in which we prepare ourselves is to ask ourselves a fundamental question. What is a universal thing in each of us? For example, African Americans in the South fought so hard to get rid of segregation and to redeem the souls of ourselves in white America. And I'd be darned if we didn't do the same thing that the Israelites did. We went right back into Pharaoh's house. The very thing that we fought against, it became our verification of freedom. And so at some point we look at the particularities, but we've got to really, really, really look at the universal instincts in all human beings. And then for white Americans, I would ask them, what is in white people? What is the nature of the spiritual malformation that gives rise to lynching, that gives rise to castration, that gives rise to separating children from their families? This is not a historical question. This is a spiritual question. And so you cannot answer any of these questions without asking without making social, spiritual inquiry. And so that it is not so that the work, what I would say to my white sisters and brothers, the work that you do is not for African Americans. It is work that you must do to redeem yourself from the grips of whiteness, which is social perversity and spiritual malformation. In other words, the work that we do is not only for other people, but it's also to remove the marks of the beast from our own lives.
You've called that white liberation theology, Ruby. And that's such a powerful phrase because, of course, white people think we're already liberated, right? And that, you know, even progressives say that, like we're there, but we're not, we're bound.
Yes, and you do that because you demonize Donald Trump. You locate the problem as he's a manifestation of the problem. He's a manifestation, but the problem is there in the prison industrial complex. The problem is there in the immigration industrial complex. The problem is there during enslavement. The problem is there during genocide. Donald Trump is, and the Republicans, they do not fear Donald Trump. Stop promoting that myth. They work with him. They hired him because he promotes their ideology, because they agree with him. They agree with the pervasive need to preserve a culture of whiteness in a growing 2/3 colored world. They agree with him because he's the perpetuator and the mouthpiece for a global white project in a world where whiteness is being overrun simply by the demographics of coloredness. And so we need to stop promoting. And no, he's not a child. Children don't have the power to do so. He's not having a childish temper tantrum. Children do not have the power that he has. Children do not have access to the instruments of the nuclear power code. He's not a child. Stop minimizing the behavior. Stop participating in a discourse that says something as absurd that these powerful men fear some jackleg like Donald Trump. He didn't make himself president. The media participated in creating that by saying, let Donald Trump be Donald Trump. They knew all about his criminal background, but yet they perpetuated it. And not only that, they created a false narrative that destroyed Hillary Clinton, that made her the criminal, that made her the beast. Because after Barack Obama, the thought of a white woman sitting in that seat after a black man is in that seat was more than the white patriarchy could bear.
Wow. I'd always thought it was misogyny that kept her out of office, but there's that whole notion of predatory black men and white women. Wow. That never occurred to me.
What they could bear went to the very heart of the historical and spiritual psyches. The thing is, they manipulated a right-wing narrative about Hillary Clinton that had been fermenting for years, and we allowed that to happen. We participated in that because of our own internalized misogyny.
Yeah, they're still saying lock her up. And when, you know, we're headed into a second impeachment trial, they're saying, well, he's a private citizen now, leave him alone, stop beating up on him. It's the cognitive dissonance is tremendous. It's mind-blowing. I mean, we're dealing with two
Importantly, Molly, you're absolutely right. And thing, if you're an African American and you're sitting there watching, the hypocrisy is enough to make your head spin, because they are yelling about defunding the police because Black Lives Matter said that, but yet we saw these marauders, this paramilitary army. Because let's be clear, it was not riots; they were a paramilitary army armed with weapons, going to seize the Capitol to murder people, our Congress people. They are not rioters. Rioters, as Martin Luther King said, are spontaneous actors. That was nothing that was well coordinated. It was not spontaneous. And so even that we need to call out. Anyway.
And they were law enforcement officers, some of them, and former military and current military, and they killed a police officer. 2 more police officers have taken their own lives since then, and I forget how many were injured, but many, including traumatic brain injury, something like 80 were injured. So,
and then to add to that, this is also what is mind-boggling. that people debate whether or not these criminals should be punished, but yet they have sat by and they've watched Black people be executed, capital punishment in the streets of America for a traffic ticket.
Yep.
That is morally bankrupt. That is spiritual irreprehensible.
Extrajudicial killing. Somebody said after the storming of the Capitol that the energy, I mean, there were paramilitary groups kind of operating in and amongst the others who were just sort of like, but the energy was like lynching day energy, was like the photographs we've
Yes.
seen from Jim Crow South, early 20th century South, where they brought their children, they had picnics. It was that kind of like madcap day, fun day out kind of energy, which is, I mean, that's diabolical to me.
Well, to be
How is this?
perfectly honest, I've seen that energy more recently. I saw it in the Southern Freedom Movement. When I saw it the day that we were arrested and put in jail when the mob showed up with baseball bats, guns, garbage pails, shotguns, anything they could put their hands on. And they were a raving, blustering mob, yelling out obscenities, degrading the women, degrading the men, degrading white people by calling them nigger lovers for being a part of that march. And so this is not just about lynching. This is in the very heart of the white psychic and the white history, this whole business of mob vigilante justice. And so it's not to feel guilty, but to ask oneself, what is, because what spiritual people have to do, they have to take people down to the bottom line. What is it in the spiritual DNA? Well, I know it's not in the DNA. What is in the social spiritual construction of whiteness that would that has given rise to that kind of mob violence? Whether it's at Wounded Knee, whether it was the soldiers at Wounded Knee, or whether or not it was the morning that Jonathan and I were arrested, or the burning of the school of the Freedom Riders bus when they landed in Anniston, Alabama, and Birmingham, Alabama, or whether or not it was the sight of 6-year-old Ruby Bridges trying to walk from that mob. That so that's the honesty that it's gonna take. That is the honesty. That is not what you need to fix in Black America. That starts at home and
Absolutely.
spreads abroad. And so we have to stop get relegating ourselves to shame. We have to stop thinking that to tell the truth about ourselves means that we're bad. No, it means that we're human. It means that every group in this country bears the mark of the beast of racism, bears the mark of the beast of sexism. We all have our work to do.
Absolutely. I've been reading up a lot the last few weeks about cults and how brainwashing works and how cults of personality form, because I really do think that probably something, at least 30 million people, white people in America, and some people of color too, are part of a cult, and how do we give them an off
What do
ramp?
you think that cult is, Molly? What is that cult for
I
you?
think the cult is whiteness.
Excellent, yes.
Yeah. And I think a very few number of people of color have bought into it because it's sort of like, well, it's like Trump says, there's my black person, it's like you're in the fold. So then you have protection because you're one of the token blacks, and you therefore are under the hedge of protection of whiteness because you've been claimed by whiteness, by white people. Um, where am I going with this? How to get out of the cult? It's a lot of what you're saying. It's to stay in touch with people. It's to be mutually human together. It's to remind them of the relationship you have prior to them entering the cult. It's to call them back to themselves, without scorn, without um, piling up a lot of facts. It's not about facts. They're not going to believe you. It's about relationship.
It's about also some deep honesty.
Yeah.
If Black Americans, if Native Americans, if Indigenous peoples can stand to be in conversation with white people given a long history, and find something good and worthy and lovable. Why is it that white people can't look at other white people without contempt, without demonization, and try to figure out a way of engaging in your community to believe that they're worthy of your work, that they're worthy of the gifts that you have? Why is it that they become a source of sheer demonization? And I know why that's the case, but I'm just saying that if this takes humility. You have to ask yourself,
Yeah.
how is it that Black Americans can still be in conversation with white people, can still sit in a pew next to white people, can
I don't
still
know.
believe in the goodness of white people? And
Yeah.
so that's the question that if you ask yourself that, then it gives you the humility
Yeah.
when you deal with other people
Yeah.
who've also transgressed certain moral and spiritual boundaries. But you believe that each of us has the consciousness of God in us, and that our work, our spiritual work, is to call people back to that consciousness that has been socialized out of us by empirism. We all have the capacity for goodness. If we didn't believe that, then there's no point of doing movement.
Yeah.
If you don't believe that, there's no point of going to church. And if you're not willing to work with people who are in your own community that visibly, like lepers did, bear the signs
Yeah.
of the marks, then what is the purpose of all of what we know and all of what we've been through and all of what we learned about ourselves?
Yeah. Our church is predominantly white, and every day I give thanks. Predominantly white, predominantly able, predominantly financially comfortable, educated, all those things. But we're not just that. We like to call ourselves the Motley Pew. And every day I'm grateful for the people who are not part of the dominant paradigm, the dominating paradigm, let's call it, who are with us in the pews, because we're so much stronger together. We
But see,
work on
wait, I
each other.
gotta stop you on that. I
Yeah,
gotta stop you.
do
I've
it.
said that I'm part of the dominating paradigm.
Okay.
There's none of us who do not bear the marks of it. If you hear nothing else from me this evening, please hear that as Reinhold Niebuhr said about Jesus, none of us are above culture. I don't care what our intentions are. I don't care what our work is. We're still a work in progress. I still internalize classism, despite how hard I've worked not to be an elitist in terms of class. That's my work. And so we all bear the marks. And so it's just not true to say that there are those out there uh, who are marked by it and we're not. No, that's the problem. We all this is a work. Jesus was marked by it. Brittany is marked by it. Molly is marked by it. Carmen is marked by it. Lee is marked by it. And that's the truth that we must tell about ourselves. It's not that because I go on a demonstration, suddenly I'm a better person.
Yeah.
It means that I'm trying, but that doesn't mean that I'm a better person. It doesn't mean that somehow I'm better than the person who stayed at home. And let me end by saying that this is very important to me. So if I've said nothing else, I'm asking us to move beyond the self-righteousness of us versus them. I'm also asking, I'm going to tell a story that I learned in the movement. On Monday in Lowndes County, Alabama, we'd be in the hot sun trying to get people to go to the polls. Nobody would open the door. Everybody was people were terrified, the Black folk, and they wouldn't open the door because they knew that the minute they opened the door, somebody was going to bomb their house once we left. And so nobody wanted to be identified. These people had children. They didn't want their families to be hurt. Somebody opened that door. A woman, a brave woman, always a woman, by the way, a brave Black woman would open the door and let us in. And she would give us water and she would give us collard greens and stuff like that. And we would say to her, come to the polls. And she would give us every last bit of her words that she would come to the polls on Saturday. We'd get to the polls, we'd get to the courthouse on Saturday, not the polls. Guess what? She didn't show up. We didn't hold her in scorn. We thank God that she was there on Monday when we needed water so that we could get to Saturday. And so that our parents might not be who we think they are. But thank God they were there to give us water when we were vulnerable, when we needed support. Thank God that they've raised us to the point that now we can take it a little bit further than where they've taken us. Thank God that our community might not be who we want them to be, but thank God they existed for us so that we can carry them a little bit further. And so that is the meaning of movement. You thank God everybody can't go the whole journey. But that doesn't mean what they did on Monday was not essential to the journey moving forward. That's movement.
Yes. Yes.
Did I get too emotional?
No. We love that. Bring it all. We want all the tears and all the laughter in church. Scorn is not going to be helpful to the movement.
I say, and any white person tells me that Black people are more able to speak about racism because I'm going to let them take the lead. I say that how is Black people more able? It started in your community. It's your disease. If you can't speak about your disease with authority, why are you going to put the burden of your disease on the backs of Black folk to explain to you your disease? And any Black person who tells you that you're not able to speak, then perhaps you need to leave that movement because they are doing to you the same thing that white people have done to them. In other words, movements is not designed to silence each of us. Movements are not designed for us to treat each other the way we've been treated. It is to inspire us to treat each other differently. And as a lesson taught us today, that each of us, by virtue of our relationship, by virtue of our experience, we are the authorities to speak about our lives, as Jesus was the authority to speak about his life. What is the source of our credentials? Not universities, not the money that we have, not the cars that we drive, not the people that we know. As TikTok teaches young folk that if you don't know famous people, if you don't have this, if you don't have that, you're a loser. Well, in God's reality, losers are really winners. And so that we've got to begin to interrogate our values. And so to understand, as my people understood in the heat of enslavement, that they might have been enslaved, but thanks be to God, they were somebody. They were somebody with each other, and they were somebody in the eyes of God. Stop calling people marginalized. Yes, they're marginalized with the state. Yes, that's true. But that's not the whole total sum total of their reality. They're essential to God and they're essential to each other. There's no way in the world I'm marginalized to my mother. I'm marginalized to my family, I'm marginalized to my teachers. I was essential to them. And so we got to stop passing off bad news as good news. Because when you say to people that are marginalized, what you're saying to them is that their definition is totally defined, that they're totally defined by how they are with the state, that the state is the ultimate definer of human existence. If that is the case, what about God? And what about the prophet Jesus? What about the prophet Muhammad? What about Buddha? What about all of the great prophets?
Wow. That sounds like the place to stop for today. Just, Ruby, what a gift you are and what a gift you are giving us today. So much food for thought and food for feeling and food for spirit for the days ahead. Before we end,
May I just say something to everybody?
whatever you want.
I just want to say to everybody what a gift you are, that your commitment is such that you would take time out on your Sunday to come and be a part of this conversation. It is your faces, it is your willingness to go into dangerous territory to get what we all need that gives me the hope and the inspiration to keep on moving on this journey. I'm not separate, I'm a part of a long story. And it is because you have put your names on the journey, on the chapters in the story, that the story continues. And that's what so I really want to just thank you, thank you, thank you. And I can't tell you, in the midst of all of the travail that we're going through as a country, all of the hatefulness that we see spewing forth, it is such a relief to be in the presence of love. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruby. Before we go, I want to give you a chance to invite people into your work at the Spirit House. Do you want to talk about that for a minute and how we can get involved?
Yes, right now we are engaged in a major reorganization, Spirit House Project, www Spirit House Project. Our biggest effort is to working with our young Daniels interns to develop a think tank that gives young people the language, the spiritual modalities that they need in order to navigate a capitalist technocracy where all of our lives are unessential and Black lives are the most unessential in terms of the state. And so that's the work that we are doing. So I would invite you right now, if you want to see what Spirit House is doing, go to my blog, Ruby Sales blog. I don't remember how to get there, but you'll find it. And it has all of our programs because we are renovating our website. But right now you can see what we have done in the past, www.spiritHouseProject.org. And we're looking for advisory board members of older and young people. So if you're inclined to advise us in our work, if you think it's valuable work, we certainly would invite you to be a part of our large advisory board, our advisory board.
Thank you. That's very generous. And Kelly's posted the link to Spirit House Project in the chat, and also Ruby Sales Front Porch, which is your newsletter, which is amazing. I subscribe. And Christina McNaught reminds us that our work continues here at our church every Thursday night with Racists Anonymous, and she posted the Zoom code. And Lee, I want to give you a chance to talk about your project honoring Ruby's life and work that we can look forward to.
Well, I am in the process of writing, after interviewing Ruby. She is so inspiring that it seemed like writing an opera about her would be the thing to do to celebrate Ruby's life and go in depth in an artistic way of lifting up Ruby's amazing life. So I'm in the process of doing that. Composing, I am composing, Ruby, and I'm, with the pandemic, it's been a little crazy with
Yes, that's right.
how it's all going to come together, but I'm working on it and thinking about it a lot, and so it's in the process.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sure it's going to be great. Thank you.
And Lee, I don't want to presume to know where you want to premiere it, but we do have a really wonderful sanctuary with amazing acoustics. So Ruby, I hope you will let us fly you here and be our guest when it comes to First Church.
Wow.
Yes, absolutely.
What a wonderful thought. Love that.
I'm so flattered to me that you're even thinking that I'm worthy of an offer. Thank you so much.
Oh, Ruby.
I'm so flattered.
You are.
I must say, I'm flattered. I'm just so moved. Thank you.
Ruby,
Sounds like the Holy Spirit at work.
you are so inspiring, and to be able to have followed you, as I'm working on this has been just an amazing thing to be a part of your life in that way.
Thank you. Molly, may I ask a question? I couldn't follow the chat.
Mhm.
Could you send me the comments so I can write people a letter based
Oh,
on their?
yes. Yeah.
I
Kelly,
like to
did
write a
you? I
general
can save
letter.
the chat. I saved the chat and I will make sure you get that.
Okay, great.
Um, okay, well, that's our time. I'll pray us out. Holy, holy God, thank you for the life and breath and words and deeds and spirit of Ruby Sales. Thank you for this moment today that has touched so many of us so deeply, that's given us courage and hope, that's helped us start to deconstruct our own scorn and hatred, that's helped us to make a little more room for humility and a healthy repentance, God, as people in your kingdom, so that we can do our part to move the arc of the universe, to jump on that arc, to bounce on it, to gently or not so gently jump up and down it, to make it bend a little more closely toward justice, so that we can reveal through our love for each other how you see us, so we can reveal each other's true natures as children of God. We ask a special blessing, a hedge of protection around Ruby and her beloveds as they move between homes, as they continue this important work, as they reach and teach and preach to new generations. And we thank you that we have formed this bond and this friendship that we pray might sustain for a long, long time. We pray all this in the strong name of Jesus, our guide and our brother. Amen.
Carmen, let's stay in touch. I want to hear about what you're doing, all right? I
Of
mean,
course.
let's stay in touch. Shoot me a line sometimes, all right? Send me your email address so I can email you.
I will. Oh,
Okay, thank you.
okay. Blessings, Ruby,
Blessings.
Carol, all your friends. Blessings, everyone. Thanks for
Thank
visiting
you.
Thank
time
you.
today.
Bye-bye, everyone. May God bless your week coming forward.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
As well.
Thank you.